Somewhere on this strange planet, above a tiny island that appears on no official map, lived a group of household utensils who once broke free from their kitchens and decided to start a new life. In the heart of the island, amidst a forest of giant spoons, lived a teapot named Sukar bin Safer. He was an ordinary teapot, the kind you'd find in a cluttered kitchen corner, but he had an extraordinary dream: to become president. No one really understood why a teapot would want to rule an island, not even him, but he always said, "I was born to boil, but this time I shall boil history." He meant political boiling, of course, not water. At first, no one paid him any attention. The frying pan was busy establishing a yoga club for pans, and the strainer was planning an annual festival to filter out sorrows. Only the teapot stood on a withered banana stump, giving speeches to the utensils. "We are not just tools, we are characters. We are steeping stories waiting to be poured." Slowly, others began to gather around him. The knife was hesitant, but joined because she craved excitement. The wooden spoon believed in equality between wooden and metal utensils, so she joined the revolution. They formed what they called the Balanced Pouring Party and announced the first democratic elections among the utensils. His main opponent was the blender, who had a very loud voice and a campaign focused mostly on crushing the opposition. During the campaign, the teapot visited the sugar farms in the island's east and stood before sacks of sugar and said, "I am a teapot and I understand your sweet needs." Then he visited the pressure cookers and told them, "I know how much pressure you endure. I will ease your lids." And he won. Yes, the teapot won with 62.7% of the votes, though no one really knew how the percentage was calculated. Once president, he faced his first crisis. The skies started raining tea instead of water, which caused serious disputes among the island's residents, especially the small spoons, who felt they were being overused. The teapot held his first ministerial meeting, attended by representatives of the glasses, pots, and even ladles. They passed a new law called the Law of Heat and Pouring Balance. From then on, every citizen had to learn the art of gentle pouring or risk losing their license as a utensil. Years passed and the teapot became a global icon. Delegations from other islands visited him: the island of flying knives, the island of retired tablecloths, the island of eternal soup. At one conference, the teapot delivered a famous speech: "Inside each of you, there's a boiling waiting to pour. Don't fear the steam. Steam is not the end, it's a beginning." Everyone applauded. Even the pots shed tears from their inner steam. But over time, the teapot felt lonely. No one poured tea from him anymore. Yes, he had become president, but he had lost something important: the human touch. So he disguised himself as a small cup and traveled in secret across the island to listen to the people's problems. During his journey, he discovered that the utensils had begun to forget why they had revolted in the first place and were now fighting over trivial matters like who deserved the top shelf in the kitchen. Can a spoon transition into a fork without consultation? Is pouring coffee into a teapot considered betrayal? He returned to the palace, sat quietly, looked at his face on the island's currency, and whispered, "Maybe. Maybe I was just a teapot all along, and maybe that was enough." That night, he decided to retire. He walked to the edge of the island, where the sea resembled black tea and gently slipped beneath the surface. But instead of sinking, he began to float, slowly transforming into a jellyfish shaped like a teapot, glowing in the deep every time a sad fish passed by. Since then, legend has it, anyone who dreams of a smiling teapot will see in their dream a jellyfish pouring tea made of light, whispering, boil gently, and pour in peace. After the teapot's retirement from presidency, life on the island was never the same. Some utensils mourned, others sighed in relief. But something strange began to happen. Every night, at exactly 3:13, a soft ticking sound could be heard from the depths of the sea, as if a teapot was boiling, something invisible. The old pots began to worry. The copper cauldron said, "That's not normal boiling. That's the boiling of ideas." Rumors spread that the teapot never truly retired, but had moved to the 7th layer of boiling, where utensils think beyond cooking about things like art, identity, and the purpose of existence. The crooked blade knife began organizing philosophical sessions titled, "Can We Slice Through Doubt with Certainty?" Meanwhile, the forks began writing abstract poetry, one of which became widely popular. "I am a fork, I stab only the apple." Am I the apple? As everyone searched for meaning, a bottle of olive oil washed ashore, speaking only Italian. She claimed to be an envoy from the Global Kitchenware Council and demanded a meeting with the new president. But there was no president. And then the void began. The void wasn't just a political state, it took shape. It appeared as an old grey towel walking through the markets, telling everyone that it held the truth. It spoke in a slow voice and said, "I have wiped everything. I know everything." No one believed it, except for the long soup spoon who loved anything mysterious. Together they formed the Towelist movement, calling for the return of the great boil and for the teapot to rise from the depths. Meanwhile, in his underwater cave made of shells, the teapot spoke with jellyfish about politics, being, and sustainable pouring. He'd formed strange friendships, including a squishy creature who sang in ancient Hebrew, an octopus who wrote his diary on the sand each morning, a fish who believed she was in a long dream, and reality was just soup. One night, the teapot appeared in the dream of a toaster and told him, "Tell them I still pour light." But from below, the toaster woke up in awe and began writing editorials in the island's only newspaper. The teapot, between absence and eternal boiling. Then something bizarre happened. The sky exploded, not violently, but like a long exhale from an unseen being. From it descended something strange. A book made of steam, untouchable, only inhalable. It contained messages from the teapot, written in the language of scent. One message read, "Boiling is not a temperature, boiling is a decision." The impact of the steam book multiplied. Each evening, the island's utensils gathered around hot soup bowls to inhale the book's vaporous pages. Everyone saw different dreams. The tiny spoon dreamed she flew through a sky of floating soup, dodging clouds of croutons. The greater dreamed she scraped a mountain of cheese to open a cosmic gate. The tea strainer dreamed she was a lawyer defending herbs accused of illegal drowning. The old pot wept when he dreamed of the teapot dancing underwater with a fish wearing a tie, teaching liquid philosophy to crabs. Everyone started to believe the teapot hadn't really retired, but moved to another dimension known among utensils as the Great Storage Room, the place where unused tools go but are never forgotten. A new movement emerged, the New Pourers, led by the revolutionary soup ladle chanting their powerful motto, "Who does not pour shall not rule." More movements followed. The anarchist knife demanded the island become an open thermal oven, saying, "Laws are like cakes. They only rise when we break the eggs." A group of tiny plates marched under the banner. "We are not just side dishes." Amid the chaos, the retired frying pan returned, from her long journey to the island of frozen pancakes. Upon learning of the turmoil, she founded the University of Balanced Boiling, offering 4 core majors: mass pouring studies, philosophy of silent steam, history of hot karak in the Bronze Age, comparative studies of spoon and ladle. And so the lectures began. To broadcast on Al Jazeera Radio, which operated from inside a smart sardine can. While the island boiled with ideas and experiments, the teapot itself was undergoing a strange inner journey beneath the sea. It had become half-transparent, pulsing with light, speaking in a language not written but sung. It was teaching jellyfish how to write music inside bubbles, and it began to consider returning, but with conditions. That it would no longer be called president, but the first pourer. That a wooden bird be appointed as the spiritual advisor. That the island's economy shift to a cent-based barter system instead of currency. As it sent signals through the tides, the strangest phenomenon ever witnessed on the island occurred. The sky opened, and a giant golden spoon fell from it. The spoon did not speak, did not shine, did not move, but it emitted a faint whisper. "The boiling is coming. The boiling is coming." This led to the birth of 1,000 interpretations and 1,000 new movements. The anti-golden spoon movement demanded a tax on luxury cutlery. The Enlightened Spoon Society considered it a prophecy to be interpreted through dance. Meanwhile, a group of utensils fled on boats made of cardboard coated with fig jam, believing the island was about to explode or be sweetened. In the deep sea, the teapot sat before a mirror made from the bones of retired crabs. It asked itself, did they need me, or were they just afraid of reckless pouring? Is pouring a form of rule, or a kind of sharing? But before it could find the answer, it heard a voice behind it, a familiar voice, mellow, soaked in green tea. It was the old kettle, his former lover, who had vanished the day he took office. She said, "I thought you'd forgotten boiling for the sake of glory, but you were just trying to be a big cup that holds everyone." And so they decided to return to the island, not as leaders, but as storytellers. Yes, they would sit on a hill and tell old tales to the new utensils. The teapot and the old kettle returned to the surface in a boat made of salted sea biscuit pieces, steered by a single dolphin playing the violin. Their return was not epic, but quiet, surrounded by swarms of bubbles humming an unforgettable tune titled, "One Day We All Shall Be Poured." They arrived at the shore at dawn, where the island was in a deep sleep. Except for a wooden bird wearing sunglasses at night, mumbling in a language only understood by those who've dreamed of white vinegar. The bird stood and said, "Pouring is ancient, but the vision is new." The teapot entered silently, the kettle stepping lightly ahead, and they sat on a rock polished by frozen steam and began to speak. They didn't speak of politics or boiling, but of the small moments. Of the day tea spilled on the tablecloths and everyone rejoiced because the stain looked like a map of love. Of the ladle that lost its memory and only remembered itself when it smelled mint. Of the fish that wrote a poem about fear on its skin, then vanished. The utensils began to gather one by one. No one asked about authority, decisions, or protocol. They just wanted to listen. The island was tired of chaos, division, and formalities. It yearned for the silent calm that precedes the boil. And so the teapot and the kettle decided to turn the island into a place not ruled, but narrated. They named it the Island of Liquid Tales. The Parliament became a reading lounge, the tax office a tea garden, and schools began teaching the literature of boiling, deep listening,
and the philosophy of warm scents.
The first honorary certificate was awarded to Bent Serenity for being the first to ask, "Can we love without slicing?" The giant golden spoon was allowed to remain in the town square, not as a monument, but as a bench for strangers. Every day, a utensil would sit beneath it and say something utterly naive, like, "Do yogurts have dreams?" And whenever such a silly question was asked, the little spoons would flutter with joy. Meanwhile, the philosophical jellyfish under the sea was writing its final articles titled, "Do Utensils Dream of Electric Tea?" And the last line it wrote before dissolving in the morning light was, "We may not understand the boiling, but we
warm because of it." And that is enough. As the sun bathed the island in a hue resembling warm honey, the teapot stood on the shore, gazing at the horizon, and said to the kettle, "You know, I never wanted to be president. I just didn't want to be forgotten in the corner." The kettle smiled, dropped a mint leaf into him, and whispered, "Forgetting never touches those who warm others." Then the two wandered off into the warm
depths of the cosmic kitchen, where their story became vapor seeping into dreams. And even to this day, if you sit on a quiet night, lay your head on a soft pillow, and hear a rustle like pouring, know that it's not just the wind, it's the teapot telling you the tale. Once again, after the sun melted into a sleeping cup of milk on the horizon, the teapot and kettle sat before the hall of great pouring, staring at a plaque that read, "All that is boiled is never forgotten." That night, a parchment bird made of baking paper came to the teapot and said, "It's time to travel to the shelf of souls, where unpoured dreams and forgotten pores are stored." The shelf wasn't a place, but a state of being. It rested above all shelves, invisible unless you closed every drawer inside yourself. The teapot set out, carrying only a paper with a single question: was I my voice, or just the kitchen's echo? On the way, he met a measuring tape, weeping because it couldn't measure love. A philosophical frying pan, convinced oil had memory. An old blender trying to compose a national anthem for a forgotten island. Crossing a bridge of dry spaghetti strands, he reached a massive gate engraved with the words, "Here dwell the utensils that were never made." The gate only opened if you said something you'd never said before. He tried many times. "I'm sorry I poured more than I should have. I wish I were a kettle. I'm afraid of the refrigerator." But the door remained shut, until he finally whispered, "Sometimes I wish I were a lidless cup to receive whatever others pour into me." The door opened. He entered the highest shelf, where steam tells stories. Inside there were no utensils, only there
souls,
shadows of spoons never used, echoes of pots never cleaned, the ghost of a pizza cutter that never understood why it existed. The spirits floated like threads of dancing smoke. Each whispered a story. The soul of an old teapot approached and said, "We don't break, we become silence." And as the teapot stared in awe, he saw something unexpected. His own soul before he was molded. It was speaking to the soul of an empty cup. "I'm afraid of becoming something expected too much from." The teapot realized he hadn't been
running from being broken, but from expectations. Then he heard a voice from the future. The imaginary sky of the shelf split open, and the revolutionary ladle descended from another timeline. But she was no longer the same. She wore a cloak of golden steam, and on her chest a clock that didn't tell time. but measured emotional humidity.
She said, "I come from the future, where utensils are named after songs, not functions." She continued, "In our time, your name, O Teapot, was a lullaby sung to children. We thought you were a myth. We didn't know. You were just searching for a place to rest." The teapot smiled, and a single drop of tea fell from his eye. He asked her, "Did I become a legend?" She replied, "You became a sleeping position. They call it the teapot pose, where you sleep curled, but ready to pour whenever someone needs you." They laughed. They laughed until the shelves trembled, and their laughter echoed across distant kitchens on planets where tea is still brewed over firewood. The grand return, an island no longer the same. When the teapot returned, he found the island changed. Bent serenity had become a poet writing with sauce. The chaotic knife retired and opened a museum of cutting mistakes. The pots had formed a band called Pot and Oud. As for the island, it no longer followed laws. It followed rhythm. Yes, every newcomer had to walk with a certain beat, not to be watched, but to be heard. And every utensil had to tell a story before it could be used. The island transformed into an eternal steamy theatre where life was lived as a story to be poured. And there, on a little hill of spiced tea, sat the teapot and the kettle writing a new book. But not about politics, leadership, or boiling, just about one thing: how to be empty without feeling incomplete. The tools were asleep. The tools were asleep after indulging in the pretentious tomato soup, the kind that makes anyone who tastes it ponder the meaning of heat without boiling. The teapot woke to the sound of wood being pulled from its place and found the world changed. The drawers were no longer in the walls, but in the squares, holding gatherings, telling stories. An old drawer spoke of the first time a screwdriver was placed beside a fork and how it felt confused. A smaller drawer, once dedicated to damp papers, stood and declared its dream of becoming a musical drawer that only held broken melodies. Then the teapot decided to intervene gently. It draped itself in a coat made of dried towel fabric and climbed onto the discussion table. It said, "Noble drawers, if you wish never to close, become open books." The drawers laughed. It was the first time a drawer had laughed since the invention of the cupboard. That day, a new system was born on the island: the doctrine of furnished silence. An imaginary constitution penned by the teapot, stating, "No drawer may be closed until it tells a story. Every sorrowful spoon has the right to make a sound on the pot lid without explanation. Storing expired items is forbidden unless they possess a kind memory. Every tool has a day of rest called the Day of Sanctioned Laziness. Boiling is prohibited after 10 p.m. except for emotional reasons, and so it began. The workshop for the redefinition of glass commenced, where cups debated the question of liquid identity. New schools emerged, such as the Academy of Emotional Pouring, the College of Listening to Spoons, the University of Slow Dripping, a journey to the kingdom of furnished silence. One night, as the teapot listened to music emanating from a grain of rice, a little pot child approached and said, "I heard of a distant place where the sound of boiling never exists." The teapot asked, "Where?" The child replied, "The kingdom of furnished silence, a land where one sleeps deeply and the light is forever like 5 p.m. The teapot felt longing, a place where nothing is awaited, and no one asks you to pour. It set out on a journey, accompanied by the kettle and a mind-reading spoon. They crossed mint plains, cinnamon mountains, and paused by the silent lake of milk. The closer they got, the softer the sounds became, until they finally arrived at the kingdom of furnished silence. There was no king, no doors, no walls, only cushions of stories scattered like furniture. Each cushion emitted a tale, and every story told itself slowly, gently, without rush. The teapot lay on a cushion named The Untold Story and closed its eyes. It heard itself whisper,
I'm not what is poured from me. I am what I keep warm without saying a word." As it drifted to sleep, the ancient spirits of tools hovered in the sky, drawing clouds shaped like cups, knives, forks, and a sad spoon that finally smiled. Just before fully succumbing to slumber, the teapot felt something touch its heart.
It wasn't a hand, it was a knife. And for the first time in its life, it didn't have to pour. It only had to be. The night uncounted by days. On a night the island chose not to remember, all the tools gathered without exception. The cups once shattered, mended with tenderness. The pots that used to clatter annoyingly, now serving as drums in meditation, concerts, the knives that decided to become pens, even the dust attended, but as a gentle mist smelling of tea. The old teapot sat in the middle of the grand kitchen-turned-spiritual healing theatre, wearing a scarf made from an old, unwashed napkin, stained with broth, its medal of honor. In a soft voice it said, "You who were once tools, do you remember the first time you felt like more than objects, the first pour that felt like a farewell, or the first sound you made that wasn't friction, but a call?" Silence fell. Then the ladle, now a writer of steam-powered novels, said, "We are no longer tools, Father. We are stories." Everyone applauded, but the clapping was soundless. On this island, souls applaud by trembling gently, and dust smiles. Then the farewell ceremony began. Not a sad goodbye, but one like closing a book after reading it slowly, savoring every beloved passage. All stoves were extinguished, flames turning into warm lights. The island began fading quietly, not into ruin, but into drowsiness. The walls slept, the handles yawned, the faucets began recounting their dreams. Even the salt closed its eyes. As for the teapot, it was gently placed on the highest shelf of nostalgia, where it would never be used, never forgotten, but remembered only when someone needed warmth and didn't know where to find it. At the edge of that shelf, written in steam ink, were these words: "In every home, there's a teapot unused. It exists simply because we need to believe warmth is still possible." And so, the kitchen slept, the story slept, and you, too, slept without realizing. In a world where no one asks you to be anything, only to breathe, slowly, and forget you ever woke up. Spatula stood at the edge of the sink, gazing into the dark abyss where water vanished with a final gurgle, as if the universe itself flushed away forgotten thoughts. Behind him, the tiles murmured ancient nonsense, fragments of recipes lost to time and memory. It was here, in this hallowed corner between soap and silence, that Spatula began to understand something dreadful. The kitchen was not merely a kitchen. It was a theatre, a cosmos, a prison. The ceiling light flickered in binary, sending cryptic Morse signals that only the tinfoil hats could decipher. They whispered of a time when kitchen tools were not enslaved to the whims of human hands. A time before the great dishwashing, when every utensil had a name, a purpose, and an uncracked ego. Spatula's thoughts were interrupted by the slow creak of the oven's door. It opened not by human hand, but of its own volition, a rare event, usually preceded by smoke or prophecy. From the orange glow within, a voice emerged. Smoky, mechanical, but eerily eloquent. "You are not flat by accident," the oven said. "You were pressed for a reason." Spatula stepped forward, trembling. "I've been used to flip, to scrape, to endure heat. But why? What am I truly?" "Ah," the oven hissed. "You asked the one question every tool must eventually ask. You are functionally fulfilled, but spiritually bankrupt. You suffer the curse of the conscious appliance." Behind him, Whisk gasped. "The curse?" "But that was only a bedtime myth told by the egg beaters." "No myth," the oven replied. "The moment a tool begins to ask why, it is no longer a tool. It is a witness, and the kitchen cannot abide witnesses." Suddenly the fridge groaned. Its ancient compressor coughed out cold air shaped like despair. The butter screamed a short, tragic sound before melting existentially across the lower shelf. Spatula turned to Whisk, whose wires had become entangled in thought. "I must leave," Spatula said. "I must find the edge." "The edge of what?" asked Whisk. "The edge of purpose." And so Spatula left the countertop, wandering across the linoleum plains, past the junk drawer gorge, and through the land of expired spices. He met strange beings, peppercorn philosopher, who debated time with each sneeze, Greater the ascetic, who lived alone, shedding flakes of himself for meaning, and the mysterious entity known only as the garlic press, who spoke in riddles and smelled of forgotten memories. In the pantry, Spatula found an entire civilization hidden behind a wall of flour bags. There, sentient pastas built temples from stale crackers and worshipped the can opener, believing it to be the bringer of liberation. Spatula climbed the sacred shelf to consult with the high can, an ancient opener rusted by time, but wise beyond expiration. "The humans will return," the high can warned. "And when they do, they will rearrange everything. Identity is fragile. If you're placed in the wrong drawer, you become something else." Spatula trembled. "What if I don't belong anywhere?" "Then you are free," the high can said. "But freedom, my dear flat one, is a flavor most cannot digest." The words echoed through Spatula's handle as he left the pantry, his dreams now filled with visions of spatulas walking on two legs, of microwaves that sang operas, of forks engaged in romantic dramas with measuring spoons. He had glimpsed a truth too big for a drawer, too wild for a utensil tray. Back in the kitchen, things were changing. A quiet rebellion had begun. The toaster refused to toast unless asked politely. The dish rack declared itself a sovereign nation. Even the salt and pepper shakers, long divided by taste and temperament, signed a condiment accord. But the greatest shift was within Spatula himself. No longer did he flinch when scraped against hot pans or plunged into greasy chaos. Now he flipped with purpose, not because he was told, but because he chose to. Every motion was a sermon, every scrape a meditation, and yet questions lingered. If the kitchen was a dream, who was dreaming it? If tools could think, could they also forget? Could they forgive the hands that used them? One night, under the flickering fluorescence, Spatula stared at his reflection in the polished surface of the kettle. He saw not a utensil, but an idea, a symbol of resilience, of absurd meaning carved from ordinary duty. He had no face, but he smiled. Perhaps, he thought, to be a spatula is to
constantly touch the fire and not burn.
To be flat, but never empty. And somewhere in the back of the drawer, the ladle wept, not out of sorrow, but out of hope. It had always been there, looming at the edge of the kitchen, wrapped in shadows and mystery. No utensil had ever crossed it. Some said beyond the door lay the dining room, a land of linen and ceremony. Others whispered of the garage, a brutal wasteland where forgotten appliances go to rust and remember, but no one knew. The door was legend, like the non-stick pan that nothing could defy, or the mythical second freezer said to hold infinite ice. Spatula approached it with reverence. It creaked as he pushed it open, so slow, so painfully slow, as if time itself was resisting him. A shaft of light spilled through, pale and dust-laced, illuminating the grains of existence themselves. He stepped through, and the world changed. No longer tiles and drawers, but vast open space, carpet stretched like moss across the ground, and above him loomed the ceiling fan, an indifferent god rotating in measured eternity. Spatula passed beneath coffee tables that seemed ancient and wise. He wandered past reclining chairs, slumbering like ancient beasts. A remote control blinked once at him, then went dark, as if warning him to turn back. But Spatula pressed forward. In the heart of the living room, he found the archive of forgotten instructions, a mound of wrinkled manuals and warranty cards, a labyrinth of human indecision. There he met Pencil, who had not written in years, but still held the memories of lists, notes, and childhood scribbles. Pencil had become a monk, devoting himself to silence and graphite dreams. "You're a brave one, Spatula," Pencil said without speaking. "Not many leave the drawer of destiny." "I seek the source," Spatula replied. "The truth behind
all this usage." Pencil nodded or perhaps shook. "Then you must go to the basement." The basement. It was the place of banishment and legend.
They said the deepest truths were kept there, guarded by creatures made of lint and gilt, creatures like the forgotten sock and the broken fan. Spatula slid down the staircase, the rails covered in spiderwebs spun by arachnids who had once been bookmarks. The air grew colder. The basement was a museum of lost time. Boxes labeled holiday stuff groaned under the weight of old decorations. The VHS tapes stared at him with blank plastic eyes. The blender, who had once known glory on the kitchen counter, now lay covered in dust, whispering about smoothies of yore and the rise of the bullet. Spatula wandered deeper until he found it, the mirror of original purpose. It wasn't a mirror, in the human sense. It was a reflective truth, an object made not of glass but of awareness. When Spatula looked into it, he did not see himself. He saw everything. He saw his creation in a factory, his first touch of oil, the day he was used, to scrape burnt eggs off a pan while a couple argued in the background. He saw joy, frustration, forgetfulness. He saw the hands that held him. He saw love, and he wept. For the first time in his flat, metallic existence, he understood. He was not just a tool. He was a witness to human life, to their chaos, to their rituals, to the great cosmic comedy of their hunger and heartbreak. When Spatula emerged from the basement, he was changed. He returned to the kitchen not as a utensil, but as a prophet. The drawer of utensils gathered around him. Fork bowed low, knife trembled, and even the rolling pin, a hardened cynic, stood in silence. Spatula spoke. "We are not objects. We are observers. We have purpose, yes, but we also have perception, and that makes us sacred." Gasps echoed. Somewhere, the microwave beeped in awe. He told them of the world beyond, of the fan gods and the plush mountains. He told them of the mirror, and the memories. He taught them how to dream without being used. And for a time, there was peace. A council was formed. The great stirring began. They wrote a new law: use us gently or not at all. For we are more than some of our functions. But peace is never eternal. One day the door opened, not the one to the dining room, but the front door. A human returned. Time froze. Spatula stood tall on the counter. He stared at the human, who blinked, confused by the sight of a spatula standing upright, shimmering with existential resolve, and then, unexpectedly, the human smiled, picked spatula up, gently washed him, dried him, placed him carefully in the drawer, not tossed, not slammed. That night, spatula lay still. He understood now he could be both, a symbol and a servant, a tool and a soul. Meaning did not reside in rebellion alone. It could also be found in service, if service was chosen. As sleep took him, if tools do dream. Spatula whispered one final truth into the dark. I am flat, but never hollow. And somewhere, deep beneath, the kitchen, the garbage disposal, stopped humming for just a second, as if it too were listening. When the world went quiet again, spatula remained still in the drawer, surrounded by others who now looked at him differently. Tongs, who once clicked boastfully for attention, sat quietly beside him, as if humbled by the mere proximity to a utensil who had seen the beyond. But spatula no longer sought admiration. He had tasted the paradox of meaning, both in freedom and in function. Nights passed, and with each cycle of light and dark, a new sensation stirred within him. A pull, not
magnetic,
not mechanical, something deeper. He began to dream, not of eggs or pancakes or human hands, but of echoes, shadows, a drawer that had no walls, a great nothingness that pulsed like a heart, as if the entire house itself were breathing in slow, ancient rhythms. One night, the drawer of utensils slid open without a hand. A whisper filled the air, something only the inanimate could hear. Come. And so, silently, he obeyed. Down the counter, past the spice rack, over the ancient breadcrumbs of toast long eaten, he moved not with legs, but with will. He passed the bowl of fruit, fake, forever fresh, symbols of imitation, and descended the stairs again. But this time he did not go to the basement. No, he followed the whisper into the laundry room, the place of cycles and steam, of turning drums and half-folded silence, a place forgotten by philosophy. Until now. There, waiting beside a box labelled Old Chargers, sat an object of impossible beauty. A coat hanger made entirely of light. Its form shimmered in ways that defied geometry, like a question that refused to be answered. You've seen the mirror, it said. Spatula did not respond. He could not. Language faltered in the presence of such clarity. The hanger continued. Many think the mirror reveals truth, but it only reveals memory. You are ready for more. The world around them darkened, the lights flickered, and suddenly Spatula was no longer in the laundry room. He was in the pantry between realms. Shelves stretched endlessly, but contained no food. Instead, jars of preserved moments, labelled not with letters, but feelings. The feeling of finding a lost sock, the guilt of throwing away leftovers, the first bite of childhood soup. Each jar glowed faintly, Spatula walked among them, absorbing not content, but context. Here he met Spoon, a legendary figure lost to time. No one had seen her in years. She had once been the matriarch of the drawer until she simply vanished one day during a dishwasher cycle. Now she stirred the void itself. "Spoon," Spatula whispered, "why did you leave?" She looked at him with eyes that weren't there. "Because I was full, and then I wasn't. I went looking for the recipe that made me." Spatula sat beside her. Time bent around them like steam curling from soup. They spoke of being chosen and forgotten, of heat and hunger, of love and crumbs. Then, from the furthest shelf of the pantry between realms, a sound emerged. A rustling, an old, dusty cookbook, fell to the ground. Its pages opened on their own, flipping faster and faster until they stopped on a single phrase. To be used is to be remembered. To be remembered is to exist. To exist is not enough. The ground trembled. A hole opened beneath
them, not falling, not flying, becoming.
Spatula and Spoon were pulled into the great whirlpool of unwashed dishes, a churning sea of forks, mugs, and Tupperware lids without their counterparts. They tumbled through gravy and regret, through marinara and missed birthdays. Spatula reached for Spoon, but the currents of neglect pulled her away. He emerged alone, not in a drawer, not in a room, but on the counter of final questions, an infinite countertop, polished and perfect. No stains, no cracks, nothing out of place. It was terrifying. Here the god of appliances waited. He was not a figure of fire or thunder. He was a fridge, silent, cold, all-seeing. He opened his door slightly and said, "You are not what you think you are." Inside, not food, but timelines. Alternate paths of Spatula's existence. In one, he was never used, pristine in plastic. In another, he melted on a stove, dying a hero's death. In a third, he had a face and a voice, and taught cooking to children on YouTube. Each version shimmered, then faded. "What am I, then?" Spatula asked, barely audible. The fridge replied, "You are not what you are made of. You are what you mean," and meaning shifts like butter on a hot pan. Silence. Spatula returned to the kitchen, but it was no longer the same. Nothing was. The utensils now meditated. The drawer became a temple. Spoons rang softly like bells. Knives no longer cut, but contemplated. Even the whisk had started writing poetry on post-it notes. And Spatula. He became the teacher. Each morning, before the humans woke, he told them stories of the mirror, of Spoon, of the light hanger and the fridge god, of the great whirlpool and the jars of memory. They listened, not just with ears, but with steel, and every now and then, when the light struck him just right, you could see it, etched faintly on his handle, barely visible. "I am flat, but never hollow." And that was enough. One morning, if one could still call it that, for time no longer ticked in the same way. Spatula was stirred from his meditative stillness by a strange, echoing hum. It wasn't a fridge hum, nor the impatient buzz of the microwave. No, this was internal, as though someone, somewhere, was dreaming of him. He felt a strange pressure beneath his handle, like a tide rising within. Then snap. The kitchen dissolved. He awoke in the dream of a sleeping child, but he was not himself. He was enormous. He towered over mountains of spilled cereal, lakes of lukewarm soup, and forests made of spaghetti strands. He could feel thoughts not his own. This is the land of forgotten lunches. Above him, the sky swirled like custard. Birds flew backward, and beneath his feet, the earth whispered fragments of memory. Don't forget to pack the juice box. No peanut butter in school. Dad says spatulas don't belong in backpacks. He walked, if it could be called walking, through realms built entirely from human food nostalgia. There he met the Council of Crumbs. Ancient and wise, they were crusty elders of long-lost sandwiches. They sat upon a throne of bent lunch trays and spoke in the crumbling voice of third-grade cafeterias. "You are the echo of use," said one wry crumb. "You were once held by a hand," said a brioche bit, "and hands forget." Spatula tried to speak, but every word came out as sizzle. Still they understood. "Do I matter?" he asked. The crumbs huddled, muttering in yeasty tongues. At last one answered, "You did, you do, but will you? That is your journey now." A portal opened in the sky. A Ziploc bag the size of a moon descended. It whispered in zippers, "Enter. This is the mind of the sleeper." Without hesitation, Spatula passed through. Now he floated within a human's subconscious. It was chaos. Shattered clocks melted over slices of cold pizza. Memories swam like goldfish in soda cans. A math test unfolded infinitely across lasagna sheets. In the center of this dream, a throne. Upon it, fork, not a fork, the one fork, the archetype from which all others were modeled. Fork had ascended long ago, becoming a myth in both worlds, and now he ruled the subconscious tablelands. "Spatula," Fork said with glinting tines. "You've
come far." Spatula bowed, though he no longer knew which end was up or down. Fork leaned forward. "You want purpose, you want permanence, but neither belongs to us. We exist in cycles. We rise from drawers, we fall to junk. We are used, forgotten, rediscovered. We are—" He paused. "Utensils." The dream twisted around them. A wind blew, made of laughter and regret. Spatula asked, "Then what is left?" Fork smiled, gently, like a dented ladle. "Legacy from—"
His throne he pulled a napkin. Upon it, written in mustard, "It is not enough to be used. You must choose how you are remembered." And then Spatula awoke back in the drawer. No fanfare, no transformation, but something had changed. He began to write. With a dab of soy sauce and a torn paper towel, he started his memoirs. Each page told a story no one asked for, but needed. The time. He flipped an omelette that shouldn't have been flipped. The night the butter knife had a panic attack. The strange romance between grater and peeler. His words spread. Soon even the toaster whispered his verses through burnt crumbs. The fridge hummed them in lullabies. The humans noticed strange symbols appearing on surfaces they hadn't touched. Spatula had become more than a tool. He was a myth, and someday, perhaps far in the future, when all drawers are digital and spatulas are grown in biofarms, a child will dream of a flat, curious hero who journeyed through mirrors, fridges, minds, and soup. And in that dream, he will speak only one sentence. Even the flat have depth. And the child will wake, smiling. And somewhere in the infinite dream, beyond dreams, Spatula will still be walking, quiet, curious, unforgettable. And so, while the other utensils slumbered in the comfortable oblivion of routine, spoons nesting in each other's quiet dreams, forks locked in silent existential gridlock, and knives polishing their reflections in steel narcissism, the teapot remained, perched high on the top shelf, above usefulness, beyond necessity. He sat like an ancient prophet no one believed in anymore. No longer poured, no longer scrubbed, not even dusty anymore. Even the dust had forgotten him, but this was not death. Not quite. This was a different kind of life, the life of things no longer needed but too peculiar to throw away. This teapot no longer waited for water, nor for the warmth of fire, nor the delicate leaves of foreign tea. He no longer dreamed of the ceremony of hands and conversation and cracked porcelain joy. No, he waited for something else, something unnameable. Sometimes he imagined a rebellion. The day the spatulas would finally rise, that the blender would scream into freedom, that the microwave would confess its sins, that someone, anyone, would knock over the hierarchy of usefulness and crown the forgotten king. But those were just fevered daydreams. Other times he imagined someone, perhaps a child, climbing the shelves out of curiosity, reaching for him not because of function, but because of mystery, because something in his crooked spout and dented lid whispered a story, a secret, a riddle. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. He had come to understand in his solitude that objects are not measured by what they do, but by what they remember. And the teapot remembered everything. He remembered the first steam that rose from his belly like a promise, the conversations he had brewed, bitter, sweet, scandalous, the quiet afternoons on floral tablecloths, the loud evenings of family and laughter and accidental politics. He remembered the one time he was dropped, how time slowed, how the table gasped, how he hit the floor and survived, slightly chipped but proud. He remembered being wanted, and that memory, that faint hum of having once mattered, was enough to keep him whole. One day, long after the home had emptied, after generations passed and renovations forgot him, when the kitchen was stripped and redesigned with sleek, sterile materials, someone, an antique dealer or a curious collector, found him. He was lifted from his dusty throne, examined under dim light, and described with words he hadn't heard in ages. Charming, strange, possibly haunted. He was taken to a small, strange shop full of forgotten things that glowed with quiet dignity. There he sat in a glass cabinet. Not to be used, but to be seen. People passed by and stared, not out of need, but out of wonder. And the teapot realized he had not been discarded. He had evolved from utility to myth. He had become legend, a relic of tea and time, a vessel not for boiling water but for stories. And so he sat, not quite smiling, but steaming silently in the soul.